Hello everyone and welcome to this video where we are going to be making a new diving bell. Now this new diving bell will include some new systems that we don't have here in the Deep 6, and it'll be something hopefully modular that can be utilized on multiple creations and different platforms. Now for those of you familiar with the Deep 6 diving bell, Deep 6 is a play on words. To deep six something in nautical terms means to sink it intentionally, like to scuttle it. But I called it Deep 6 because there are 6 seats. So you can see there's 4 there and 2 more here. So we have 6. Technically also a bed, so it should be Deep 7, but Deep 6 is the play on words. Now the one I want to make will be smaller. There's no need for a bed. That's kind of like a recovery place for longer operations, as well as having the legs, which is nice for if it touches the seafloor, so you can still make your way in. But we do have this other hatch now, so it's not absolutely necessary to have the legs. So there's a lot of different things that we can minimize and kind of scrap down to have that much more of a easier, smaller, and more accessible system that can be placed on a wide variety of vessels. A little top secret footage here. Sheppy and myself are working on a new project that includes multiple different types of deep sea exploration equipment, and I think that you'll like it. In working on this, Sheppy also sent me this Hyper Bear chamber and diving bell that was made by Nanode. This was made in 2021, so this player may not even be playing Stormworks. Hopefully they are, but regardless, this is well before we had the compressed gases update, so now this type of diving bell can even be expanded and be even better. So this one is kind of our starting point example, and I do have to say I actually love this kind of decompression chamber here. It has a little living quarters, beds, a bathroom, and a way to get into this diving bell. Now previously, you kind of had to open this, and you could see that the way the physics work in the previous arrangement of the game is a little different than what we currently have. Now this diving bell, while small, it still seems to be similar to the Deep 6, so I do want to see if it can be made a little even more compact. That said, I do love the ISO container sized decompression chamber and how you can kind of place it on the deck of any ship and have proper decompression for your diving bell. So maybe we can make something along these lines. So to make what we'll call the Deep 4, the smallest possible size that we can use will include having this door membrane right here, the corner. And I mean, you can't even get through that, so at minimum it'll have to be this size. And of course you'll have to put the door frame. So something like this is probably the smallest possible base you can have. Now one thing that I have in my little Scut mini sub, and it's a really good way to have kind of an emergency fallback system, is to use these connectors, the hardpoint connectors, and actually place counterweights that when released in an emergency situation, you can end up floating to the surface. So yes, it introduces more bodies, so if you're about trying to minimize lag, if you don't have the best PC, then this probably isn't for you. But I do enjoy redundant systems, and something like this where we could put weights on the bottom would be an awesome fallback. So here it is with the weights on the bottom and with kind of the base start of the diving bell itself. I managed to put 4 seats inside the space, and we have one of these hinged dock hatches. So the idea is this can hinge itself to something, they connect, and then you can have an easy way to access and get inside your creation. Now that orientation was wrong, we'll have to put it up like that so it opens up into the ceiling. But overall, this now gives us the ability to get into the space, have a seat, and swim out on the bottom. Now for now I put windows. We'll have to see if I need other equipment. Obviously we'll have to have an air system, we'll have to have a winch system, some displays in here. We'll have to have even more systems, and I kind of reserved the space there around the door for that, but we'll see. One preliminary test I want to do is drop the thing in water and see if it is negative buoyant, which it is. So even with it full of air as it is, we're still having the water sit outside. So one of the big downsides to my large diving bell, the Deep 6, is the fact that it's so big. If, like, look at the space inside, in order to have this thing be negative buoyant, we have to have a lot of counterweight, and it would have resulted in so many weight blocks that it would be impractical to lift it with a crane. So that's why I devised this system where we actually end up flooding this space using water as kind of a ballast tank to increase the weight, and then pumping it out when we want to store it. So for a larger system, for a habitat for example, where we have a large interior space and a lot of air, I think we have to do it that way. But with our little Deep 4, we probably could get away with just this. Did a little bit more tweaking on the exterior design. There is a spot here for a microcontroller, so we'll see what we need to put inside this thing to make it function properly. But I would say this is a pretty good starting point. Now, because we're using a hardpoint connector, the two bodies are pretty joined together. So even here on this weight block is where we can put our electrical connectors and whatnot to make this thing join up to whatever mothership it's on. So we can do something like this. We'll find a way for the cradle to kind of work. Alternatively, yes, you could even use that space there and then have to have the cradle that it's on to be a little bit taller, but that's still a possibility. That way, even if we lose our counterweight, we could still connect the thing to the ship. But that's kind of a problem for a little bit further down the road. First things first, let's get ourselves in tuned with what we actually have here. The two most important kind of life systems are the heater and the air cleaning system. So this air cleaning system, I made a video recently, put it in all my mini subs and diving bells. I'm going to be using the exact same one here. And that actually leaves us with this spot right here for another instrument panel that will hopefully have our winch controls. As much as I like having windows, it may be just more practical to put the diving suits here in the walls, so that way you, if you're down there, you at least have two spare sets that you could swap in with. Now these ones don't have charging features. Let's see, we might be able to charge them up depending, but my only concern with that is we might be kind of getting outside of the scope of this project. First of all, we can't charge through that port here because the hard point is, and yes, we can orientate it in a different direction, but we'll only be using one electrical line coming from the winch and not a air line. So without the air line, we'll have to be using our compressed air gas tank to charge these things up, which is less than ideal. One thing I do realize is I may have tried to make this thing too small, and we'll see if that works, especially when I start putting in the required microcontrollers. What helps me for micro truck builds and stuff is putting all the microcontrollers outside, and then once I've determined what I need, then I can start populating it, because there are things that I can possibly hide and things that I can't hide. So I ended up placing a couple microcontrollers here, including buttons. I did actually put a new system, which is a radio transmit, so you can actually transmit and hear via this cable anchor. So that may be something I have to look into adding in this diving bell. I added an emergency release heater with the temperature setting. And the last thing I gotta do is spawn myself an empty microcontroller for the door and the docking station. So I've added the air systems, and now it's kind of starting to look cool with all like the piping on the top. Again, devs, if you're watching this, I pray for a fluid hose anchor that is just a single piece like we have this. I pray for that. And now we'll see if we can do the magic of trying to put everything together. Now, the one thing that I like to have on my diving expeditions is spear guns for the sharks. So in this case, we'll put spare ammo there, and then we'll put the actual spear gun beneath the seat. Now we do have two sensors on each side, the barometer and the air quality, I believe. So those are there as well. But that kind of fit pretty nicely there. And ideally, I deleted a bunch of spaces. Like everything here in yellow is what I could fit with microcontrollers, but I'm hoping I don't have to use this space. Everything in yellow is what we could use. Now, one thing I don't have in here is a bilge pump. So if the diving bell turns sideways and water comes in, it will stay. You're not going to be able to pump it out, unfortunately. First little test here, and you can see we have to be sitting in this seat to operate the winch. Likewise, we got to be sitting in this seat to turn on the lights and stuff. So, not ideal. At least it would have been nice to have them in a spot where it's easy to select. But then we could put on our diving gear and jump right out. And because of the way that, well, in theory, we don't even need the door frame if we're using the frame from this. The only reason I put that door is because it actually helped prevent me from falling out. So that's the only reason I put that. But in theory, this whole thing is obsolete because this door will act as a door does. Alternatively, we could have just the regular old opening, like we have this, but then you won't have the other door, and you won't have the option to close it at all. It'll pretty much always just be open to the bottom, which isn't the end of the world, I suppose. It's not a bad thing, but water will be able to get in. So, do we close it off, or do we leave it open like this? Overall, though, the functionality seems to be good. We can easily kind of sit. The floor thing is a problem, I suppose, especially if we can easily fall out, but at the same time we could easily kind of get in. And then I do have to program in this door. Right now it does nothing. And you could see we control the winch, we have a handle to tether ourselves, we have some equipment up there. Now this would turn on our air system, and in theory should calibrate, because now the more that I'm talking and standing in here, eventually, yeah, there we go. So this gives us a certain amount of time. One thing I do want to test is if we were at the bottom and now we had to emergency surface, if I press this and it releases the weight, oh yeah. Well, other than the flare that seems to have caused everything to go crazy, we do have the actual diving bell on the surface, but also it seems that it's since it's not top heavy or not bottom heavy anymore, it's actually kind of flipped on its side. So I will probably need some permanent weight distributed along the bottom of the actual diving bell to ensure that it stays upright in the event of surfacing, as you saw. And because of that, we could probably remove some of this other weight and kind of make it, you know, look a little cleaner or whatever. And that flare is way too bright. That is no good. If anything, that would cause mass confusion if you're trying to escape a situation rather than help you at all. R&D is always interesting because as I make new elements, I think of other things to add to my other diving bell. So one of them is the camera that sends the feed to the ship will only be activated inside here if someone is inside this chamber. And we have a camera on the bottom. I put a little display. As well, you'll see kind of a little legs. If we drop off the weights, we'll still want the diving bell to sit on the deck of the ship. I've added the connectors for that on the edges here, and you'll notice they're pointed down. So if we set it down with the weights or without the weights, it'll still work the same way. Now the door itself I have to adjust. I didn't do that yet, meaning like this button that opens this system and pairs it with the ship and all that stuff. But I did like the airlock door on the bottom. Being able to open it and close it does help us in moving this up and down without flooding the space, so that's important. The speaker system and transmit radio will be something I'll add to the other diving bell as well. And another feature that I didn't have on the other diving bell was that the ship can now read the depth and altitude of the diving bell itself. And you'll see here when someone is inside the diving bell, the video feed changes back and forth. When no one's inside the diving bell, it'll just show what's underneath. So that's intentional, and I'll do this to the other one as well. It gives us, you know, there's no need to see inside the diving bell if it's empty. I added the new rotating beacon light that is attached to the emergency system. So if we have an emergency surface, this will be rotating, and that'll make it easier to find, presumably. The thing's getting pretty jam-packed with features, probably more than I originally thought, but it is something that will be useful to the diving bell. Just FYI, I did go through the Deep 6, add the features, and fixed up the microcontroller for the winch. So now you get the smooth winching system as part of the Deep 6 creation. With the Deep 4, the end is in sight. Of course, I do have to adjust and clean up the interior, but other than that, it really just comes down to the door, and then I'll do some practical tests to see and confirm whether it's working right. Of course, this button that we just have that's called door will have to go, and most likely what will be the way forward is a system that will control the magnet. So on one of them it will be the actual flip switch with the door magnet toggle, and then the other one will be to open the door. And then another one will be an indicator telling us that the doors are paired or connected. Now, of course, with this microcontroller, one of the things is if I wanted to take this build to the very realistic, I'd be able to put something where I'd pretty much make sure the thing can't open unless, you know, the pressures are equalized, etc., etc. But I am making it more Stormworks realistic rather than real life realistic, if that makes sense. So pretty much if the door is pressed to be open, and if we're above the altitude that we need to be, then the door will open. So we don't have to wait for, you know, a decompression chamber and everything, which would be realistic and nice and cool, I think, but not necessarily needed, I suppose. What I did do is place an override, so it'll force the door to be open in an event of an emergency. So that will be our channel number 4, I believe. So pretty much 1 will be the magnet, 2 will be to open the door, as long as we're above the right altitude. So it can be like whatever, and a low of 1. But we'll have to keep in mind that this altitude thing or the override. So the override will be channel number 4 coming from this to there. So that gives us a nice little system. The door connected is part of this. It would be pretty easy to make this door not open unless it's paired only, unless it's an emergency. So in that case, it's the more realistic application of what you'd expect for like a diving bell where, you know, where you definitely want to decompress properly. Now, I am tempted to make a system that works that way, but just because my other systems don't really work that way, do I really want to start that really extreme realism path? Probably not. One thing I did miss is the door open itself has to be on a capacitor because it's on a push button. So we'll make it a 5-second open when you press the button, just like that. What I can see this being used for, and it would be pretty cool, is if I do make an underwater base at some point that you could kind of attach to different things, or a mini sub that can pair with this system, then it'd be pretty cool to be able to, you know, have the system operate and attach underwater. Downside of this microcontroller is it's fairly large, and for that reason I'm not sure where I'll place it. I don't really want to get rid of the window, but I guess I could put 2 tall windows and have the microcontroller there, albeit that would be a little different, but possible. Moving the window and putting the microcontroller there kind of works, and then inside, you know, you have a nice wide window rather than tall, so that might be the play here. You see that we have 2 spots here, so not enough. Up there we have some, but not nearly enough, like only a 3. Here I have one, but I would have to be exposing it to the interior, and it's not big enough either. We still need this one to have 7 spots, and this only has 5, so it's still too small. Without adding height or whatever, this may be the move. Interesting enough, I mean, if I did want, I could put a window here, but I think as far as this diving bell is concerned, if it has all the systems needed now, which I'm just going to check before I start to replace the color and do the final touches, this should be pretty good here. The one thing I put and then removed was a battery, so we do have to have a battery just in case the thing ends up being disconnected from the rest of the vessels, like the cable. But what I will do is put a little threshold gate, and over here, if we're at 0 or a high of 0.99, then it will give us this warning here that we're on battery power. So obviously if we're depleting our battery, that means we're not connected. Obviously, maybe that's not the case, like what happens if your ship's running low on battery, but I do want to have that there. So you can see now with the sub, it is draining battery slowly. I'm not sure, I have to do some tests to see why, but if you open the door, you can pop in, the door will shut, and then you can be on your way. So that is pretty much this. Now I will be taking the other one, the design styles, and implementing them on the Deep 4. As expected, it is the distance sensor and the cameras that are depleting the battery, as well as some other things, but I'm not going to worry about that too much because in theory it's going to be docked on a ship that's connected here, keeping it charged up, or you just turn the breaker off if you need to save power when it's disconnected. So that little bit of drainage won't really play a factor into this. And let us get to the coloring. So I'm going to match the coloring scheme. You can kind of see the size difference here and appreciate exactly what it is we've done. I'd say it's a great example of miniaturization. The bigger one obviously does have a bed and the lower part that you could use, but the smaller one, honestly, more convenient and overall a better design. So quite nice to see the two changes like that, or the differences. Inside is now colored, so once this door closes out of my face here, you'll kind of see the space is nicely defined, very small, about as small as we could have made it, but still a good, useful creation that will be kind of associated with other builds. We got the decals on, we got the little text there, and that's pretty much it. As promised, the big one also got a radio upgrade, so now you could actually have radio comms with the people that are watching the mission. Now, I know this wasn't part of the original scope, but I'm making an Alston class version of the diving bell boat with some finishing touches for this display. Of course, you can control the winch from here, or you could operate it from the diving bell. What better place than to start with the ROV microcontroller and kind of dumb it down so it's a little simpler to read. The microcontroller has been adjusted. We've added some information and things. I do have a system when it is offline. Then it says bell offline, and that will come from input 15. Input 15 is literally just the combination of channels 1 and 2 that come out of the diving bell, which is the depth and seafloor. So if those things are reading 0, then we pretty much don't have to do anything. Now I can break it out like this, but to be honest, I could just do it right in here. In here, it's a very, very simple microcontroller, just a combination where I went, if I disconnect the winch, go in here, bell offline. If I plug it in and go in here, it actually reads that it is connected. The only thing is it's showing black because it's paired with the bottom of the ship. So I'd have to actually disconnect it and push it off the side. And at that point, you'll actually see that this will become something. We're going to run a practical test. Here we are on the new configuration of the Alston, and you can see the diving bell in the back with some other things. Now, one thing to keep in mind is the pulley system has length 1 and 2, and it doesn't like it doesn't move right away, for better word. It almost acts like some friction. Now, we do have to release the diving bell, but I do think that from the seat here, if we just enable systems and push this up and push it out, that we should be able to get the diving bell over the side of the boat, as we have. And then we can lower this just a little bit. Now you could see the water is working. There's the wreck. We even have a light attached to the bottom. So if you want to, for the operator to kind of see, they can see from here. So it says our seafloor is 81 meters. We're at a depth of 2. Now, that's all we need to do here. If you're playing with a friend, your friend will stay in here and monitor the situation. If you're not playing with a friend, then at that point, you can come here and pop yourself in. Now, once this hinge door hatch closes, we're good to go. So we can winch down. Now, keep in mind, like I said, there isn't, like, the slack itself will go down much faster than the diving bell itself. But eventually the bell does start to drop. And you just have to be careful with the cable, because as the cable is unspooling like this, we're going to end up with much more cable than we originally thought we'd have. Maybe not a bad idea to put a little dial in here that actually tells us how far we've unspooled the cable. Because if we know we've unspooled it, for example, 100 meters, and we're only at 55 to the seafloor, that won't really work. So I might add that in. But what you can see, and run the air system. So what you can see is that we can open the door now, which is good. If we pop onto this side, we can turn our heater on, but it's already hot. We have our external spotlights. We have our radio transmit, our exterior regular lights. Now you see that we are sort of coming to a point where there's no more slack in the rope. We're not really dropping any. Well, so we could hold this for a little bit and let go. And that'll give us a little bit more length or depth. Now this is all white. Presumably that light is shining too hard. So maybe I have to move the light a little bit away from the camera. But there we have it. We've dropped ourselves down to the wreck. And now you could put on your diving gear, open the door, and you can go for a little swim. Now, the whole thing is filling up with water, so interesting. Have to see and understand why that's happening, because there should be pressure on the bottom. So I may actually have to go and put that regular door with the door edges and door frames and such. But as far as a diving bell works, now you can swim around, and you of course have your diving bell here that you could make your way back into. But I definitely don't want this much water hanging out in here, so that's one thing, and the winch length is another thing. Made some changes, added a winch length here, so 63. So with that in mind, then we'll know that once we hit that 63, we're going to be close to the seafloor. And added another system here too that will automatically pump air in through these air tanks when the water level starts to rise. So it'll increase the pressure, and that will prevent the diving bell from filling up with water. So here we have it. We can then swim around like we did previously, explore the wreck, and when we've had enough, we could make our way back to the diving bell, which should remain dry, as you see here, because the water level has been kind of kept at bay due to the air pressure. Now the air pressure, the tank air pressure, is going to bleed off and drop off, and then at that point we will have a bit of a, possibly a problem with, you know, not a lot of air left. So I might add some more tanks, but it seems at greater depths that is the only way to kind of do it. So it does keep the liquid level at bay. The only other alternative would be to not have an airlock that's open, but have a button that you press just like this one, where it pops it open for a second and stops it. So that is another possibility as well. Or kind of adding more water tanks. But this does give us some way to kind of do it. And then when you're done, you can winch yourself up, and it should slow down when we get closer to our boat. And that emergency scenario where you drop this, the weight will fall to the bottom, and we are going to be flung up to the top because of our low buoyancy. Now, the diving bell will have to be rescued at this point. You won't be able to really get out unless you open this door and possibly sink the thing. And you kind of see it's kind of upside down now and whatnot, but at least it will allow you to surface and make your way to the top if you really run into a problem. I could tilt this thing up and give us a little bit more air, one more tank of air, possibly, just like that. So now we have 3 air tanks on the top that feed into the diving bell itself. I also did put a pump that will pump water out. So between these systems, hopefully we can keep the interior dry. I fixed the labeling on this. We got winch length, we got depth. So overall now, this system seems to be working. Everything seems to be kind of set up. So there we have it, our new diving bell. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments what you think, but pretty much this is the start of an amazing underwater base style thinking. So let's see what that can bring us. Stay tuned for more videos, stay tuned for more creations, and as always, happy Stormworksing everyone. See you next time.